and welcome to the Art of Being Human. We've been talking about various emotions, and I have been focusing on worry and guilt, and I'm going to review a little of what I said. But in addition to that, you need to know that these emotions are powerful. It's easy enough for a person such as myself to say, oh, this is what you feel when you feel guilty, and this is what you feel when you're anxious, and this is what happens to you when you have a certain emotion. But that's doing it from an academic sense. You need to realize that when you're in the throes of these emotions, they can be a state of being for you for quite a period of time. They're not your basic character, of course, and we've already discussed that. But they can be so real and they can be so powerful, they influence you so much that you are in their possession almost. They can possess you. And what you're doing is that you're living them. They are your reality. So if you are in the throes of some deep emotions, and we're going to continue a little bit more with the worry and the guilt, then get help with it. If you need help, get help with it, because otherwise they'll strangulate you. And now eventually they'll wear off, but you don't know how long it's going to be before they wear off. And if you need to have the help, you need to have the help. And the other thing to remember, I was thinking about it this morning, if you're talking about joy, peace, the emotions that we like to have, they're not just the absence of another emotion. In other words, joy is not just the opposite of sorrow. Can I say I'm joyous because I don't have sorrow? That's not the definition of it. The emotions go much deeper than that. Not to have sorrow is good, but to have joy, it requires more than just the absence of sorrow. It is a state of being of itself, and it can be part of your basic character. So you need to deal with the emotions head on. If there are emotions that are uncomfortable, if there are emotions that you don't like, then get help with them and realize that they're not your basic character, but they can linger for long periods of time. And when they do that, you can be in serious emotional trouble. And this is where you need to have help. You know, if you're depressed, you can have a few days of the blues, it lifts. All right, people do that. But if it lingers on and on and on and on, then you don't just have a case of a few days of blues. You may be going into a major or a clinical depression, and that requires treatment. Fortunately for these emotions, they're deep, they're profound, sometimes they're very uncomfortable, but they're also very treatable. Depression is so common that it's sometimes called a common cold of emotional illnesses, but that doesn't make it untreatable. It can be very treatable. Now, having said that, I want to do a little review, and I'll be turning to this chart here, of what we have gone through so far. And in terms of guilt, what we have not gone through and what I'm going to be talking about is how do you get rid of it? But let me go through the information that I have here for you first. Worry and guilt, they're futile emotions in that you get nowhere with them. Guilt is focused on the past. Worry is focused on the future. If I'm to make a chart of it, here's the present time. Let's supposing this is the present, it's in the middle of this line. Guilt deals with the past, worry deals with the future. Worry and guilt are immobilizing, but when you feel guilty about something, you are angry and upset at yourself because of something that you have done that you feel guilty about, but you don't need to feel guilty about it sometimes. That would be false guilt. If you have real guilt, there are ways of handling that too, and we have discussed them, to make recompense, to make apologies, to do what you can to rectify a situation. So worry and guilt. Now, the two types of guilt, I've already started mentioning them here. False guilt is what you feel guilty about, but you don't need to feel guilty about. Something that happened that's not your fault. And that's particularly true if you are a victim of abuse, or if you've had a bad marriage, or you're divorced or something. It's easy to feel guilty when you don't need to feel guilty. Now, you can have false guilt and true guilt, and they mix together. If you have certain guilt, the emotion of guilt, sometimes part of it is true guilt and part of it is false guilt. You don't need to feel as guilty as you do, but there is a segment of something that you may legitimately feel guilty about. So false guilt is when you feel guilty about about things you don't need to feel guilty about. True guilt is when you have a real reason for guilt, and that is when you need to make amends with somebody, or you may need to apologize. Sometimes you don't have to do anything, but you need to work through the guilt that you have. It depends upon what the situation is, and you have to go in terms of emotions from situation to situation. I can be here and make a rule of thumb, and usually the general rule and the rule of thumb is important. We need to know what that is, but on the other hand, emotions are so deep that the rule of thumb may not apply to everything, because there's always individual differences among people. Now, society is guilt-ridden. We are taught to worry. We are taught to feel guilty. If you worry about somebody, it means that you're caring for them. That is not necessarily true, because the Bible never tells us to worry, but I'm telling you about what society feels. And if you feel guilty, then you're repentant over something that you've done. Of course, that wouldn't be true in false guilt, when you don't need to feel guilty. Guilt uses energy about an event that you can't change. Guilt is based on the past, things that you've done on the past, and sometimes what you're doing in the present you may feel guilty about. But in terms of the past, you can't change the past, so you have to deal with it as something that's over and done with. When it comes to the future, you don't know what the future holds. So therefore, worrying about it isn't going to affect the future. It's only going to use up your energy, and it's not going to be helpful to you at all. Now, anyone, in terms of emotions, anyone who controls your emotions controls you. It's a bad situation when someone can control your emotions. They can make you feel guilty when they want to. They can make you worry when they want to. What would be the purpose of this? It doesn't make any sense at all, as far as I'm concerned. But some people choose to feel guilty, and some people choose to worry, and somehow they think it makes them better people. And it doesn't. It just destroys the energy that they have when they could be working on something productive. But anyone who controls your emotions controls you. But it gives people an unhealthy control over you. You have to remember, and I've said it before, and I'll probably say it 1,000,000 times, no one has the right to control you. No one has the right to own you. And you, likewise, do not have the right to control anybody else, and you don't have the right to try to own anybody else. I see it a lot in girls and guys that are going together. When they're going together, they want to make sure, or one wants to make sure, that the other one is true to them and doesn't decide that they want to see somebody else instead. For all of those things that you do to try to control how another person feels or what another person does, you have to let go of that. Human beings are human beings. No one controls anybody else, and no one owns anybody else, at least in a free society. Now, it is true when you're raising a child, you do have to take control, because a child can't take care of themselves. You have to teach them, you have to do things that you need to do to help them to grow up. But at the same time, when they grow up, they gradually get their independence. The purpose of raising a child is not so you own them for their entire lives. You teach them how to be independent. If I had a child, I would have to have control of them, but I would teach them gradually how to become independent. So my goal is to raise the child to be an adult, an independent adult, where they don't have to look to me for answers, although they certainly can get my input on things. I don't control them. So if a child is growing up and it's cold out, I may say, you have to wear a sweater. But I say you can wear the blue sweater or the red sweater or the green sweater. I don't care what color you wear, but you need to wear a sweater. And this way I'm teaching them to make choices. Yes, they wear a sweater, but they can choose the color that they wear. So they're gradually learning how to make decisions as they grow up. And finally, when they grow up, they can make decisions for themselves. In that sense, I relinquish control. I don't own them for their whole life. When they're 32, they don't have to come to me and say, what should I do now? Now, it's always wise to get the input of a parent, but it doesn't mean that the parent makes a decision for a child that's already an adult. It's all right to ask questions, and what do you think, and what do you think? We do that with our friends all the time. But when we are asking our friends for input about a problem, we don't expect them to tell us what to do. We only expect them to give us input so that it'll help us to make a decision. And in a sense, counseling is the same thing. When you counsel somebody, as a counselor, you don't tell them what to do. You show them various alternatives. You help them to understand what the results will be of the alternative that they choose, but at the same time, you're not telling them you must, you must, you must. Unless it's a situation where their lives are at stake, or something horrible would happen to them if they made a certain decision, then you can be more directive and say, if you do this, this will not be a good choice because this is what's going to happen. But normally, when you have normal decisions and people's lives aren't impacted, you help people to learn how to make decisions themselves so that they can do it, and then they can live their lives without constantly having to have somebody else tell them what to do. So anyone who controls your emotions controls you, but it gives people an unhealthy bonding. It gives them an unhealthy control over your life, and you don't want that. Now, the origins of guilt, and we mentioned this before, I'm just going to run over them briefly. Your childhood memories may make you feel guilty. You may feel guilty because it's self-imposed, because for some reason you want to. Children-inspired guilt is when a child makes an adult feel guilty because they feel that their condition is due to the fact of an adult having done something to them. Or an adult having been on drugs or something before they were born. Then there was school-inspired guilt, where school is saying, or a teacher is saying, you will be one of my favorite students, but you've got to do this first. Or you'll be the hero of the class, but you've got to do this first. You've got to win the game. You've got to do this, that, or the other. As I said, no one controls you, and you don't have to be influenced by that. Businesses thrive on guilt. Some choose to feel guilty. What would happen? Why does a person choose to feel guilty? Why would a person want to feel guilty? Guilt is a very, very hard emotion to take, and it's very hard to take care, to handle it, because you just become obsessed with it. But some people choose to feel guilty, and I think some of the reasons I've listed it here. For attention, if you feel guilty, people might hover around you and say, oh, it's not that bad, you know, forget about it. For approval, oh, I know you're feeling so guilty and you're trying so hard to be a better person. That can be a kind of approval. To feel exonerated when people tell you it's all right, I don't care. And so therefore you don't have to worry about it. Or to feel gratified in some way, or you may have a need to suffer. Believe it or not, there are people who want to suffer. They really feel better if they're suffering. They feel more pure or something. I don't know how to explain it, because there are so few people, fortunately, that have this problem, but they feel if they suffer, somehow it's doing penance for something in them, and they feel that they're a better person as a result of it. No, they're not. You don't become a better person because you suffer, as a general rule, and you don't become a better person because you feel guilty. What you do, if you go through those emotions and you try to deal with them yourself and you suffer from them, is you usually end up by feeling more intense about what you already felt intense about. If you felt guilty, you analyze it, you analyze it, you analyze it. You get into a space where it possesses you, and all you do is analyze that guilt. And why did I do this? And why should I have done that? And why couldn't I have done something else? You, excuse me, you end up by digging a hole and falling in it. It's like rehearsing your emotions. You rehearse your emotions. I'm guilty, I'm guilty, I'm guilty, I'm guilty. And by the time you finish rehearsing the emotions, you feel 3 times as guilty as you would have if you just left it alone. Now, I'm not saying that you can always leave these emotions alone. You do have to handle them, but you don't have to become so intensely involved in digging into an analysis of every little thing that you end up by increasing the suffering that you're already going through. But people sometimes do have a need to suffer. They want to suffer. They feel it makes them a better person, or it gets them attention or something. One thing to remember is that if you are concentrating on something, some emotion, some way of behaving, some kind of personality trait, and you're concentrating on that over and over and over again, and you won't leave it alone, there's a payback for that. You're getting some kind of a gratification from it, or it wouldn't continue. People will not continue certain emotions and certain behaviors if they're not getting something from it. If they're getting something from it, they will continue. So you need to ask yourself the question, why do I want to suffer? Why do I want to feel guilty? What is that? What is in it for me? And I've asked people who have come to me for counseling, what's in it for you if you continue to feel this way? What kind of a payback? There's a secondary gain. You have the emotion, you're dealing with it, it's awful, but there's a secondary gain from it, or you wouldn't continue it. So you're getting something from it, and what you need to do is figure out what that is. Well, I feel better if I'm guilty because I feel that I'm handling my emotion, except guilt doesn't handle emotions. Behavior handles emotions. Doing something about it handles it. But making yourself suffer and suffer and suffer, that's not helping at all. But there would be a payback from it if you really feel that if I feel guilty enough, somehow I'll be a better person. Somehow it'll exonerate me. Somehow it'll make me better. You know, then I could see that you might feel that there was a payback in terms of, I feel better when I feel guilty, so therefore I need to feel guilty to be a better person. It's kind of a twisted reasoning, but some people feel like that. And so if you're one of those people that feel guilty and guilty and guilty and guilty and you can't let go of it, what you're doing is you're analyzing it to death, and then you're falling into the trap of that, and it's not giving you any relief. To analyze something to death and not feel better, that's not the way to get relief. And I know with counseling, for many, many people, I've talked to them and they've said, well, I'm still grieving over this, or I'm still feeling guilty about this, and I'm asking you, why are you going over it? Well, I got to get it right. I've got to figure it out. And so they go over it and over it and over it. And I try to usually help them out of it by saying, what good is it going to do you to grieve and to suffer or feel guilty and to suffer from it? It doesn't seem to be solving the problem. It only is making you worse. And what happens is that it has a life of its own. It kind of perpetuates itself. And you start thinking about what you should have done or what you could have done. But the fact is you didn't do it then. You may not be able to do it now. And all you're going to do is feel guilty about it, and it doesn't make you feel any better. Don't rehearse your emotions. Validate them in the sense that you realize that they're there. So you need to validate them as being real. But then don't pursue them. Don't just keep after them all the time. As if you analyzed it one more time, it would make it better. Because that never stops. It gets on a cycle and it never stops. So you need to have relief from the emotions that you feel, and you can't have relief over them if you just keep trying to analyze them all the time. Overanalysis can be a bad thing. If you need to have help with that, you need to have professional help in which they can help you to put something in perspective and then let go of it. And if you can let go of something, then you're going to feel a lot better, because it's not going to keep on coming up to hound you. One thing that I have noticed, however, especially for women, if they are going through the menopause, this over analyzing and dwelling on something over and over and over and over, just dwelling on it, and it doesn't get better no matter how you dwell on it. You may think you're going to have it get better if you dwell on it enough, but you don't get better. That goes along with some medical conditions, and I'm thinking of menopause because I've talked with women who are in menopause, they have hormonal problems, and everything comes up to haunt them that they thought was solved. If they are in an emotional state because of menopause symptoms, anxiety because of menopause symptoms, what they thought was solved in the past comes back up to haunt them because it's one of the symptoms. It's a symptom due to hormonal change, so it becomes a physical symptom, not just an emotional symptom. And when you handle the physical problems that are going on, that kind of dwelling tends to go away. I've noticed people with autism, they have the same thing. They dwell on something and they dwell and dwell and dwell. It doesn't get better, so they dwell some more. They think that it'll help, and it gets into a circular pattern where they can't let go of it. And that's part of the illness. You may be dwelling on something because you have an illness that needs to be resolved. You need to have symptom resolution for the illness. And when that happens, a lot of that dwelling goes away. Well, I didn't get to what I wanted to get to as to how to eliminate the guilt. I'm going to do that next time. But I do want you to realize emotions are powerful. They influence your life. They're not a part of your basic character. You may be suffering from emotions at a level where you don't need to suffer. The guilt you may suffer from may not be true guilt, or it may be true guilt, but you may be exacerbating it. You may be making yourself feel worse because of continually digging and dwelling into it. I've seen so many people that do this, and I know maybe I've spent a lot of time on that, but I've met so many people who do this, and you need to have relief from that because you don't want to stay stuck. You may have a reason to feel guilty, you may not, but whatever it is, you don't want to stay stuck in it. And that's why you need to get help, or you need to realize that if you're going to dig in and analyze everything and just dwell, that's not a healthy thing. It's not going to help you feel better. It's not going to help you do better. You need to learn to let go of that. And the way to let go of it is just not to focus on it. Don't allow yourself to focus on it. If it comes up, then try to put it to one side and do something else and take your mind off from it, because dwelling just never cures anything. So I will close it here, and I'm going to continue with this next time. Please join me then.